Photojournalist Joe Larger brings us to a church where the seats have cup holders and the pastor has a vision.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Are you coming to the church service?
Yeah.
Welcome to Copper Hill.
Well, I want to welcome you here this morning as well. We're really glad to have you here. We opened up last weekend, and we feel we're off to a really good start as a church.
Rejoice, my soul, and sing.
What if we redreamed the dream of having a church become the center in the community again, where we can provide that kind of help, recreational, emotional, spiritual help that people are looking for in our culture? Let's go meet in a theater.
Family ties, growing pains, full house. All kind of just marking and painting a picture of what the family was like. Well, what are the...
I'd love the opportunity just to introduce Jesus to them. That's what drives me.
Stand and see what the Lord will do.
Okay, so that really happened. That was Channel 12 that came out on our second weekend that we were together. They thought it was a novelty that there was a church meeting in a theater. And so they did that article. My name is Brad, if I haven't met you. And 20 years ago, on March the 15th, that'll be this Thursday, but we're celebrating today, my wife, Elfie, and my two sons, Aaron and Matt, my daughter, Katie, along with 21 other adults and 19 kids, walked into that theater for our very first gathering and to celebrate what Jesus had done in our lives, and with a conviction that what he had done for us, he wanted to do for this city. And that was our simple message, that we wanted people to know of the love of Christ that caused him to give his life. Yeah, that's right. Give his life so that we could experience communion with our Heavenly Father. What a story that is. No wonder it's called the gospel. Good news. So this morning, what our hope is that we could tell you some of the stories over the last 20 years. And those stories aren't going to be about a building and those kinds of things. They're going to be about people, because the church is really people. So here's what I want to do. I want to start by introducing one of the first people that we met prior to that opening 20 plus years ago. It's Bruce Campbell. This is Bruce. Welcome him.
Hi.
So, as you may know, Copper Hills was a pioneering church plant. That simply means that my family and myself were the first people, and we didn't have a building, we didn't have anybody else as part of the church. And so what do? You have to meet people. And so we did this thing where we walked through our community to meet our neighbors. And one of the doors that we knocked on was Bruce and Angela's home. And Bruce, tell us a little bit about what happened at 6516 West Matilda Lane that morning. It was a Saturday morning.
And we already agreed I'm not allowed to fib.
No, you can't lie. Straight up, you can be honest.
So back in that day, Angela and I, we were living over there on Matilda Lane, and we had a couple of our kids were pretty young, pretty small. So many of us have these security screen doors, so there's the door that you open and there's the security screen door. So whether it was a doorbell ring or a knock, I don't recall, but I recall opening the door and seeing a gentleman, looked a little more like that than...
Haven't aged a day.
Not a bit. No. You look the same.
Yeah, that's right.
But
said we weren't going to lie, right?
But I didn't open the security screen door. I saw Brad standing there, didn't even know him, and didn't even open the security screen door.
Yeah.
Less
than enthusiastic about this.
Yeah, so Brad talked and went through what he was doing and what he was talking about, and talked about, starting this church and possibly. And I listened to him, and then one little thing kind of clicked with me. He said, and so, we hope to have a building someday, and we hope to, but right now we're just meeting in our home. And what I heard was he wants to meet in my home. And
that's not weird at all.
And it wasn't, I just wasn't ready to have Brad and others meet in our home. So I just recall saying thanks and good luck.
Yeah. In spite of that less than enthusiastic reception, there obviously is a time where you did connect with Copper Hills. It would be a few years later. And why did you end up connecting at Copper Hills?
So again, as I mentioned, Angela and I were growing our family, and it came to that time where we kind of wanted to maybe get a little bit of our lives back. Babysitters are key, right? Babysitters are key. And we thought, where could we find some great babysitters? And we kind of ruled out the bars. Maybe not the greatest place to search for babysitters, but hey, I think there's a church meeting at the elementary school, and they might have some great babysitters. And so we showed up at Copper Hills searching for good babysitters.
And you found?
We found great babysitters.
Yeah.
Including Jen LaFleur and some of the others, and just, it all worked.
And along the way, you found Jesus, and Bruce was
Wasn't looking for him.
Bruce was an interesting guy, still is. He's a student, he's a learner. And so we spent about a year or so together meeting almost every week, talking about the Bible and talking about Jesus. And along the way, Bruce said yes to Jesus, and then he was baptized at Copper Hills. And
With Angela.
With Angela, yep. And Bruce was serious enough about the scriptures. I guess it was about a couple of years after walking with Jesus, I was going to be away for a week, and I said, Bruce, it's your turn. Why don't you teach? Like you never done that before, but you preach one weekend and pick something that's appropriate for you and your life. And I just suggested, because Bruce has had some ups and downs in his life, as we all have. I thought about the guy named Job, right? Who can't relate to him? And I said, well, I'll give that a shot. And so that was Bruce's first shot at teaching from the book of Job. We have video of that particular talk. It's the only one we have in archives.
Job was a man of God, a man of great passion. And one day, over the course of an entire day, messenger after messenger after messenger came to Job and gave him increasingly worse news. Your fields have burned down, and I'm the only one that made it out. Your servants are gone, and I'm the only one that made it out. Job had 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters.
Great, right? Yeah. So,
Little rough around the edges.
but what a courageous guy. Like, the vocabulary has changed a little bit. It really is Job now at this point.
Figured that out.
We're good. We still laugh about that together. So, here's what we want to do. We want to tell you a few more stories of what Jesus has done in the lives of some people. The first story we want to show you is a neighbor who lived across the street from me, Jim Strohacker. And we lived across the street from each other for several years, but it took kind of 7 years to kind of fashion and warm up a friendship a little bit. But you'll be stirred by Jim's story and then some others as well. Take a look at this.
Everybody kind of moved into the neighborhood at the same time. They're all new homes. Everybody was busy out doing their thing, and I had probably lived in the neighborhood probably about 3 or 4 years before I formally met Brad. And that's how it went. He and I met in the middle of the street, believe it or not. And he came right up to me, introduced himself to me, and he did not hesitate at all to ask me about my walk with Jesus and did I know Jesus. And he invited me to my first adult Bible study group. I wanted to know more about the Bible. I wanted to know more about a personal lifestyle with Jesus. I had, after going to my first Bible study groups at the Clausen House, I started to learn that it was really important to be in the presence of a Bible study family, because on Sunday you're in you're in rows and you learn something. But in the Bible study group, you're actually in a circle and you're all joined together. And it's really a family bonding experience. So that was one of the first things that I actually learned. But at the same time, I met some great people like Brian Beachy, Bruce Campbell, who helped introduce me to being a more grateful person, to help me introduce to service work. I got involved on the setup team and a little experience that you guys call Moving the Park. You never knew if we were going to pull it off or not. We had a little screen that you would put up and a smaller projector, and it didn't have quite the boom from the speakers that we had. And if it got real windy, there were some times it was canceled, but we always made the best of it. And I think one of the best things I learned about Bruce is how he huddled everybody together before we actually got things started. We actually prayed for the success of the event. We actually prayed that there'd be a chance for all of us to talk about God that night.
So Copper Hills for me started as a rough morning, waking up at a friend's house, and we stumbled into church because figured that was a good idea, considering the previous night's festivities. And so we came in and we checked it out, and kind of had mixed reviews. My personal take was not a huge fan. No offense, but I wasn't feeling the crowd vibe. I wasn't feeling the pastor. And back then I didn't know any better, right? I just was like, it's not my cup of tea. And then, so that was my first experience. But of course, along the way, this hospitality, right? Team person who happens to be Elfie, caught me and introduced herself. And she was easy to talk to, and I found myself going, "Oh, this is different." Of course, in those days, I was still very much more committed to my vocation in music than I was to church life or my relationship with God. So ended up back in the music scene, doing that thing full time. No church, no return to Copper Hills, none of that, until after we had some hiccups with the band that I was in. And things kind of came to a crashing halt, in which case I stumbled into a service on a Thursday night at a church called The Summit at the time, I believe, and I didn't even know they were meeting there. I was just there in desperation, praying, thinking, wow, maybe I'll just catch it from being by the building, I don't know. And as I stumbled in, I heard the gospel. They were teaching a young adults thing, and the guy speaking happened to be the intern for Copper Hills. And so he's like, yeah, I'm actually teaching over at Copper Hills right now over the summer. The pastor's giving me some room to teach. And I was like, cool, man. Well, I remember him. He was all right, but you did a really good job, right? And so I came over, and when I got there, I was just totally embraced by this community. And I mean, talk about going from a posture of the church that was judgmental, unreceiving, not very loving, not very generous, to experiencing, embodied in the people, just deep affection for me, irregardless of my differences or my youth or whatever it was. They just loved on me. And so I fell in love with the church body.
I grew up in a Christian cult, and everything was very negative, and everything was controlled. And everything was decided for me growing up. I never could make any decision on my own. Even if I knew that the Lord was speaking to me, it couldn't come from me. It had to come from my dad. So I grew up with this whole false belief system. I questioned a lot of it, especially like junior high and high school. And then when I went to college, that's when I truly realized that it was not a good place and that it was a cult. And then March 6th of 2016, I ended up leaving home. Because I knew that God was calling me out of that place. So yeah. And then I found a church back home in California, and they helped me see the truth of who God was and how big and awesome and amazing He was. And yeah, I got to join the worship band there. I got to figure out who I was and who I was to Christ, and how Christ was the whole center of my life instead of just like this person I had learned about growing up, and it was really amazing.
It was probably back in 2008. We had some really good friends that actually invited us to play on a co-ed softball team. So we went out and started playing softball with them. Met a couple of other people who had attended Copper Hills. So started to develop some relationships and those kind of things there. They actually invited us to their life group. So I'd been asked to, previously kind of attend life groups or check those out, and I was always a little hesitant. But this just seemed a little bit different. I think it was because we had developed some of those relationships and made some friends with some people outside of that setting. So growing up, I didn't really have a strong faith. Grew up in a pretty typical home. Would go to church on certain holidays and those kind of things. I had friends over the course of growing up that would invite me to some Sunday school stuff or some youth group events. but there was really no personal connection with Jesus or anything like that. It was just kind of something that we did. What really started my personal relationship with Jesus is we decided to attend the Starting Point class, and that's really where I started asking myself some tough questions, and like I had this kind of building knowledge base, and that class kind of got to the point of, okay, so now what do you do with it? So I remember sitting, I think it was probably the 4th week of that class, and we were having a pretty kind of robust discussion, and there was another couple that was in the class, and this gentleman was kind of pushing back pretty hard on some of the things that we were talking about with regard to, you know, Jesus and what he wants for us and the relationship he desires with us. And it was really, really interesting because all these questions he was asking were really going through my mind. And it was a little kind of unnerving and almost creepy because it was like someone was reading my mind. I wasn't asking the questions, but I felt like the answers were being directed like exactly and specifically for me. So looking back, I mean, I clearly recognize that as God's voice talking to me. I wrestled with that just kind of struggle in my head for the rest of that night, and went home from class that evening. Probably prayed more seriously than I ever have at that point. And it was just, I felt this sense of peace in my life, and I kind of invited Jesus to be the Lord and Savior of my life. And that was kind of my defining moment of when I knew kind of what my eternity was gonna look like, and kind of where my walk was gonna go from there.
So right from the, you could be up. Right from the very beginning in what Jesus taught, and we wanted to teach what he taught, that what he came to earth to do was not just forgive our sins, that for sure, to pay the penalty of his life, but in one of his most famous prayers, he says, teaching us to pray, he's talking to his Father in heaven, and he says, like, may your kingdom come to earth. May it not just be some place we go after we die, but might it be here as well. So it isn't just like half the equation of saying, like, I need forgiveness and I need Jesus in my life, but the absolutely interwoven piece is now growing with him and becoming a follower and an apprentice, a disciple of his, to grow and get to know who he is more and more through every experience of life. And so take a look at kind of chapter 2 of these stories.
When I made that decision that night after Starting Point class, I really that was it, and I just felt this calling to keep going. So continued kind of jumping into stuff, started to branch out and lead our own life group, took on a little bit more of an active role in the kids ministry area, and really just felt kind of Jesus guiding me and working in my life. That was interesting and like freeing all at the same time, knowing that I didn't have to have all the answers right now, because like I was putting my faith in someone that had all those answers.
I can tell you the biggest thing that I learned from my experiences with Copper Hills is that I can have a personal relationship with God the Father. And I learned that through Brad himself. I was way too dependent on Copper Hills, the church, and Pastor Brad Clausen to provide that for me as a conduit. There again, I don't know what he and I had with meeting in the middle of the street, but he actually met me in the middle of the street, and I remember him putting his arms on me and looking in my eyes and saying, Jim, you don't need a priest. You don't need a confessional. You don't need a church. Good grief, you don't even need me. You can have your own personal relationship with God the Father because he's your Father. That really meant a lot to me. That's where the door really kicked open for me.
My husband and I stumbled upon Copper Hills because we were visiting a friend in the neighborhood right across the street, and I had to pee, so we had to find a restroom before his house. So we went here, and then we saw the sign that said no perfect people allowed, and we were like, oh, that's really cool. And then we moved out here, and my coworkers invited us here, and then we walked up and I was like, no way, this is where I peed. So it was great. It was pretty cool. So growing up in the cult, everything was very negative, and it always felt like something was missing. And there was no grace, no love. And then coming out of it, and especially coming here, it was just like everyone here just loves each other, and they have a genuine love for God, and everyone wants to read the Bible, and they want to experience that love and actually pour out onto other people. Worshiping has always been my safe haven. I always feel God speak to me through music, and I feel like heaven is just like right there with me, like Christ is right beside me, and it's kind of amazing. It feels like a warm embrace when I'm singing. Christ is using me with leading worship with the kids, so I get to help the kids feel hopefully something similar when I'm up there helping them worship Christ. Like, yes, this church has been here for years, but it's kind of nice that I get to come in even as it keeps expanding and know that God has a place for me here, and He's going to use me somehow, some way in this church. So.
There are so many stories within our church family of ways that people not only came to know who Jesus was and give their lives to Him, but then stories of how they grew deeply and walked closely with Him. And sometimes it's like Jason, who said, it was a need to know something. I had questions about Him, and I had doubts, and I wasn't sure. And when I asked those questions, I discovered I could ask them, and that Jesus really did have some answers for those big questions in life. Then other times it's not so much a need to know something as just a circumstance that develops in life that kind of drives that need. You saw Jim with his dark sunglasses. Over the last few years, Jim has lost his vision through an eye disease. But his early years of growth are so inspiring to me, because that formed the foundation of being able to deal with something like that in such a positive, hope-filled ways. And now God's using his blindness in our culture, in our community, to point people to Jesus. Is a marvelous story. So sometimes it's need to know, sometimes it's those challenging circumstances that come along. And I want you to take a look at this story, and you'll get a better sense of what that means.
We ended up at Copper Hills about 2 years ago, and my sister from Colorado came out.
She was Googling, and so she noticed Copper Hills was less than a mile away from our house, so she's like, let's check out Copper Hills. So we came to Copper Hills with our son Cooper and Ryan's sister, and we really liked it.
And it was great. Pastor Brad was teaching, and afterwards he came up and he introduced himself to Katie, myself, and my sister. So Brad said, welcome, and with open arms invited us back, and we just kind of put it off for a little while.
We liked a lot of things about it, but then life just got busy, and so we didn't make it back to Copper Hills for several more months. When Cooper was 6 months old, we'd just gotten back from a trip to Colorado, and it was the first day back to work for Ryan and I, and so we dropped him off at the babysitter's house in the morning, and then late that morning we got a phone call from the hospital.
And I get a call stating that Ryan, this is the Thunderbird Medical Hospital. Do you know your son is in the emergency room? And I said, no. What do you mean he's in the emergency room?
And so they wouldn't tell us what was wrong, but they said you need to get here as soon as you can.
When I got there, they had taken me into a room, and there was about 8 to 10 people already in there. And I looked at them and I said, where's my son Cooper? And it was just kind of a blank moment. And I said, is my son alive? And they shook their head. Oh, I remember looking at one of the doctors shaking their head, no. And I was on the phone. Katie had just called. I was on the phone, and I had screamed and just dropped down to my knees and just started crying. He had passed away at the babysitter's house. She had put him down for his morning nap, and Cooper slept very well. He was on a really easy schedule, and he made it pretty easy on us as parents. And she had put him down for his morning nap, which was about an hour and 45 minutes. And after the hour and 45 minutes, she yelled up to one of her daughters, who was in high school at the time, and said, "Will you bring Cooper down? I got to feed him give him a bottle." And her daughter had went in there to pick up Cooper, and he was lying face down dead. My sister had reached out to Pastor Brad that night when it happened, and basically had told him what happened. And Pastor Brad was at our doorstep the following morning, and my whole family had flown from out of town, and he was there in the morning and came in and prayed for our entire family, and Katie and I specifically, for what just happened.
So, in the midst of complete brokenness, just us and our entire family, just kind of our whole world flipped upside down. Copper Hills was just such a support for us, and they showed us so much love. We had Cooper's memorial service at the church. We celebrated his first birthday in honor of him at the church with a balloon release. They just showered us with love and compassion, and they prayed for us, which it was just phenomenal. So Jesus really used them in our darkest time to lift us up and help us feel supported and loved and give us comfort.
We know through his story, not only has it impacted multiple people already, it's going to continue to impact people. We love our son dearly, and we know because of his story, there's people that are coming to Christ because of his story, and in the faith that Katie and I have when we discuss Cooper's story. And again, it's not us, it's Jesus allowing those words and coming into our hearts and being able to have that hope.
I mean, really over the past 2 years, Jesus has just carried me through everything. In just the most difficult time, he has filled me up with things that it doesn't even make sense to have, like joy and hope and strength and peace and comfort and things that I wouldn't have without him. And so the way that Copper Hills reacted to our situation and reached out to us, it was a direct reflection of Jesus. I mean, that's exactly what we saw. And we even talked to Pastor Brad about that and said, we are blown away by what Copper Hills has done. And he said, it's not Copper Hills, it's actually Jesus. And that's our mission around here, is that we would become more and more like him until we're actually mistaken for him. And that's actually what we experience. So I feel like so much has changed in the past few years, and God has just continued to work through me, and without him, I don't know how I would be able to do anything.
Cooper actually was our firstborn, and we do have some exciting good news. Katie is actually 15 weeks pregnant, and we're having another boy. So we're very blessed with the opportunity to be parents again.
Our King works in wonderful and really mysterious ways sometimes, doesn't he? But he always does that personally. He always does that. Katie and Ryan's story is still being written, but through unspeakable tragedy. It's only our God that could take something like that and somehow or other be magnified through it, impact lives through it, actually grow faith and trust in him. That's so unique. And that's been the message of this church, but not just this church, our King, since he arrived on planet Earth, was there really was hope. God had not forgotten this planet. He was interested He had taken notice, and now he was going to engage himself. You know, he knows about tragedy. He experienced his own. Talk about rejection, right? But the darkest day on earth turns out to be our brightest day, our greatest hope. From the very beginning, as we walked through our community and we talked to people about whether or not they were part of a church family, and many said yes, but my guess is over 50% of the people we talked to that first summer said they weren't part of a church, or maybe had been at one point but weren't any longer. And we asked, like, why do you think that's the case? And we got educated. The most common thing they told us was the church does not make a difference in our community. It just doesn't. We wouldn't miss them if they weren't here. Now again, church is not a building, right? Church is people. And our great King has given us the unspeakable privilege of being good news to this world. Not just talking about it, that's good, but to live it. To live as people of hope. Live as people who have some destiny, that have something to look forward to in this life, and that's the presence of Jesus with us always, and something to look forward to when we close our eyes for the last time, confidently aware that we're going to live in his kingdom here and then all the way through to eternity. And that's been his story, and that's our story, and it's our great delight to tell story after story of how that's real. It's not theory anymore, right? It's just real, and it's legit. And what God does through people who let him write the story of their lives. Let's take a look at how some of these stories carry on.
Well, the biggest thing that I'm excited about for this church family is that you guys just never seem to give up, which is the real true spirit of a real family. I've seen Copper Hills go through some ups and downs, but here again, look at how a wonderful church community has been built. How now you guys are not only serving the population of West Wing, but people from other areas as well. And if I'm not mistaken, you guys have already had a spin-off church, if I'm not believing too, Axiom. It's pretty spectacular.
Axiom started as a conception here at Copper Hills. This is an idea that we've been praying about and discerning, and it started with the prayer. So we started to gather a few folks, said we're going to pray, we're going to dream, we're going to survey the city, we're going to put a plan together. And so we did slowly through a process of just discipleship formation. And so I think it was just faith and risk, and the risk of releasing your own, right? And I'm not like some big prize, but they let us go. And they let just me, but a team of us, they sent us off and said, okay, God, like, here they go. That risk always pays off. Sending and blessing and risking and being generous, those things always pay off. And that's what we've been seeing. I mean, we're about 5 years in now, almost. And God's grown our church. We're doing well. We have a space of our own. We're experiencing transformation for people. Our new space, of course, is we're celebrating this weekend, which is a grand opening of a new venue that's for the city for us. It's a gift to the city, to the neighborhood, to the community. It's in the heart of Old Town Peoria. It's in where the pioneers of Peoria started and planted. And it's where we're sinking our flag in the ground and doing the Jesus life. And so our doors are opening as you guys are watching this video, I would guess.
That's one of the things I'm most excited about, to see what this church will continue to be able to do for God's kingdom in this community. It's not about numbers, it's not about size, it's not about the large scale things we do. We do those things really well, but this church puts such stock in individual people and individual relationships. I think that's what kind of hooked me at the beginning, was having those strong relationships coming into a church.
This is a church where you don't have to have everything perfect. You don't have to have everything going great. This is a church that does take notice of people and is invested and wants to know what's going on, and they want to help you and they want to pray for you, and they want to remind you that Jesus has you in his hands.
Great stories. That you can be seated, by the way. As Gavin mentioned, right now what's going on at Axiom, like 10 miles to the south of us, is they're launching their grand opening of a brand new facility. That's an extension of our family and the work of what Jesus has done. It's been a remarkable 20 years, Bruce.
Yes.
You remember this? If you can't see that, that's a door hanger that our small group of people, just before our launch 20 years ago, we hand-delivered 12,300 or so of these. And you no doubt remember that exactly, specifically.
I'm sure I got one.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. It was probably the second time I rang your doorbell or hung something on your door.
Probably.
Probably about as joyful as the first time, right? So your story, Bruce, is not just about being incredibly rude when I rang the doorbell.
Truth hurts.
It's not about just coming to a church, looking for babysitters, and finding Jesus in wonderful ways, and publicly declaring through baptism who you belong to. It's certainly not a sermon on Job.
It's Job, by the way.
It is. Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's something deeper that's happened in your life over these last 20 years that really point to the work and power of Jesus. And how do you think your story is different? What's unique? What's your story say because Jesus has lived in your life and your soul these last 20 years?
Yeah. Well, we could start by him standing up here.
Yeah.
But all kidding aside, if I go way back, even long before meeting you, I just recall being so empty, just empty, and trying to fill that void with, I would say the things of this world. And then even, in my arrogance, not opening a screen door, but still pursuing the things of this world, money, my career, and now recognizing that not only has Jesus filled that hole in my soul, but the woman of 25, married to Angela for almost 25 years, and she gives me truth and love sometimes when I don't like hearing it, right? To have her be able to sum it up and saying, you're just more loving. That's all Christ. Yeah. That's not me.
Yeah. That's the work and that's the story of what Jesus does in every one of our lives. There have been some ups and downs over the last 20 years. There have been some dark days, actually. You don't know this, but I've resigned 3 times to Jesus. It's because it was hard. And things we would try just didn't seem to make any difference. I remember being in our master bathroom one day saying, Jesus, it just doesn't matter if I pray or I don't pray. It doesn't make any difference. And yet it does. Perseverance matters through hard times and joyful times, and it just matters. Here, hold on to that. You might need that.
I'd love to. I have one now.
There's a season in Israel's history that was really a dark season for them. They had some enemies at the borders of their country ready to invade and take them over, and ultimately they would. There was a civil war and strife happening within their own country, and Jewish person fighting Jewish person for reasons they didn't really understand. If you would have asked them as a nation whether they were following God, they would have gone, no, we're not. Because we're not sure God's interested in us anymore. We're just not. It's a dark time. And then amazingly, through a prophet named Habakkuk with the strangest of names, God has a message to this remnant of faithful people that he is going to still do something. And in the early days, when there were hard days, this became a bit of a rallying cry for us as our core team. And this is what it says in Habakkuk 2 and 3. It says, then God answered. See, Habakkuk had asked God about whether this was really worth it and whether God was in it. And God says, Habakkuk, write this. Write what you see. Write it out in big block letters so that it can be read on the run. This vision message is a witness pointing to what's coming. Turns out it's who's coming. It aches for the coming. It can hardly wait. And it doesn't lie. If it seems slow in coming, wait. It's on its way. It will come in the right time. And this is none other than Jesus Christ, who some 800 years later would come to this earth in kind of a mysterious way. And not everybody got him right away. And there were hard days for him and dark days, but he persevered. And ultimately, he becomes our hope and our life and our salvation. It would be my hope that through these stories of what Jesus has done in individual lives, which are really repeated hundreds of times in all of our lives, that you would examine your own life and go, can I tell that kind of story? Is my story about a day of just coming to the end of myself and saying, Jesus, I'm with you or I'm with nothing. And then to watch what he does in you and to grow you and form you into his likeness. We say this around here a lot. We want to increasingly think like Jesus, so we're increasingly mistaken for him. And that's what we want to see happen. That's what we want to see go on. And so may he do that in our group for his sake and in his name.